A lot of questions have come in on the issue of social isolation, and you talked about the music students helping out, but obviously it's what are some things that can be done to prevent this or at least alleviate social isolation for seniors? Catherine, do you want to start? We'll pass it on to Kate afterwards.
Sure. There are several ways to think about this. There's the individual who is living in their home, and back to my comment that they're not going to leave their home, and what can we be doing to increase their engagement? And there are several examples around the country of organizations that have used technology to engage with those that they serve through services into the community. So they're two-way conversations. It's not just receiving information about how that senior is functioning. We have technology that can basically track an individual's movements within their apartment. It can track when the toilet has flushed, if somebody has gotten out of their bed, if they've moved into the kitchen, opened the refrigerator door, things that reflect the fact that there's movement, anticipated movement, and can in some ways even predict problems. How many times that toilet is flushing a night can be an indicator of an infection, a urinary tract infection. So there are ways in which you can receive information, but that doesn't tackle the social isolation problem. And so some of these organizations have created a way by which they are engaging with the individual. And one of my favorite examples is actually unrelated to technology at all. And it was a small town in Maine that used their 911 call center to check in on individuals who they perceived were at risk. And every morning at a time of day, which they concluded was a relatively slow time for that city, they asked these individuals who were homebound to check in. And if they didn't receive the check-in call, then the first responders would be sent. Well, what they learned over time, and it's a fascinating story on NPR if you want to hear it, is those calls weren't just, "Hi, Joe, I'm up and I'm fine." It began to be the building of a relationship between those who were in their homes and this person that was sitting in the 911 dispatch office. What the individual in the home needed and wanted was the opportunity to engage in a conversation, not just say, "I'm alive this morning." And so some of the organizations around the country are using that, using their technology to every day engage with an individual on a different question. And in fact, they are becoming sort of the eyes and ears into the home, because we can have lots of ways in which an individual can communicate with us, but somebody really needs to be asking pertinent questions in order to get at what's happening in terms of changes in conditions. So I think that technology is increasing, but it's reliant upon a platform that engages in a way that provides personal response to the individual. So that's one example. Scott probably has a gazillion, given what he does, or Kate, yeah.
Kate, we'll start with you.
So my perspective is a little different in that most of my research I spend talking with older people about a variety of things. So I've probably talked to 1,000 people over my career about what it means to be old, what it feels like, what some of their concerns are. And I can tell you that I think a big misconception about social isolation is, building on your point, Catherine, is that contact equals, solves problem of isolation. And the biggest problem that people talk about is finding meaning. So you have time, but if your time doesn't mean anything, if you're simply busy, if you're going through routines and nothing means anything, that's wherein lies the big problem. So yes, having contact with other people is great, but it's not the same as engaging in a way that makes your life worthwhile. So when we think about, especially technologies, I think we have to be careful in that assumptions about, say, Skyping, may or may not be that fulfilling thing. A second caveat is, going back to families, is right now it's estimated that 20% of women over 65 in the U.S. do not have children, somewhere around 13% for men, although it's harder, the data on men isn't as reliable. that number is expected to increase. So again, when we think about how we get people engaged, we have to think about the fact that many people, don't have children or families, and that they're looking to engage in meaningful ways. And again, coming back to the study that we did in this area, even people in high rises. So, the people might say, some of the staff might say, well, we have things, we post things, and nobody ever comes. But when you talk to the residents who live there, they say, well, because I don't want to just sit there and be talked to or lectured at, or, I want to meet people, but I'm afraid to get involved and reach out too much, because what if I get in an argument with my neighbor and then I have to live by that person forever? And so finding ways to get people together in ways that make people feel safe, and that they're not just doing an activity, but that they're doing something meaningful, and getting out of the place that they live, being able to go to the art museum to see an exhibit, being able to do something that, allows them to do something that's meaningful for them. And I think that's just a big thing that needs to be considered when thinking about isolation, is what is meaningful for that individual. So it's the doing with and not just the doing for.